In a Georgia courtroom pulsing with tension, a judge faced his childhood friend, accused of theft in a system rigged against her. His bold verdict would shatter decades of injustice, sparking a movement that stunned the nation. The courtroom in Savannah, Georgia, hummed with the murmur of spectators and the faint creak of wooden benches, the air heavy with the scent of polished oak and the weight of anticipation on a humid morning in 2019. Judge Marcus Wells, a black man in his early 50s, sat at the bench, his black robes crisp, his deep brown eyes scanning the room with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating a system that often resisted his rise. At 52, Marcus was known for his unwavering commitment to fairness, his sharp mind honed by years of battling prejudice in law school and beyond. But that morning his steady hands betrayed a faint tremor as the bailiff called the case. The state of Georgia versus Lena Carter. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his gaze dropping to the file. Theft, breaking and entering, a familiar pang of sorrow tightening his chest as he thought of another life caught in the system's unyielding grip. Lena Carter was escorted in, her wrists and ankles shackled, the chains clinking softly against the hardwood floor, each sound a quiet accusation in the tense silence. Marcus's breath caught as he looked up, his world tilting on its axis. The woman before him wasn't a stranger, she was Lena Carter, his Lena, the girl he'd grown up with in the segregated town of Valdosta, Georgia. Memories flooded back unbidden. The long summer days they'd spent running through the pecan groves, their laughter a defiant melody against the whispers of a town that didn't approve of their friendship. The promises they'd made under the shade of an old oak tree to always protect each other, no matter what. He remembered a particular afternoon when Lena, despite her own hunger, had slipped him half of her only apple after a long day in the fields, her smile bright with kindness, a selfless act that had taught Marcus the meaning of generosity in a world that offered her so little. But the woman standing before him was a shadow of that girl, her frame thin, her face etched with lines of hardship, her once bright eyes dulled by years of struggle. Marcus's grip on his gavel tightened, his heart pounding as he forced himself to speak, his voice steadied despite the storm inside. "Ms. Carter, you stand accused of theft and breaking and entering. How do you plead?" Lena's voice, soft but resolute, cut through the silence. "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said, her gaze flickering to Marcus's for a moment, a spark of recognition lighting her eyes before she looked away, her head bowing slightly, a gesture that spoke of shame and The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in, as Marcus tried to reconcile the girl he'd known with the woman before him, a woman the system had already labeled a criminal. He remembered their last day together, the summer before high school, when his mother had caught them sharing a soda on the porch, her voice sharp with warning. "Marcus, get inside, now," she'd snapped, her eyes cold with the weight of a world that didn't allow their friendship to exist. He'd looked at Lena, his heart breaking as she'd whispered, "I'll see you around." But they hadn't. Not after Lena's family was forced to leave town, pushed out by rumors and unspoken threats. Now, as the prosecutor began his opening statement, Marcus's mind raced, the weight of his past colliding with his present duty, a duty that demanded impartiality but felt impossible in the face of a bond he'd thought was lost forever, and a guilt he'd buried deep. He'd seen Lena taunted by kids for her worn clothes, and though he'd wanted to help, he'd stayed silent, a choice that haunted him still. The prosecutor, a stern white man in his 50s named Charles Bennett, paced before the jury, his voice cold and clipped as he painted Lena as a desperate thief who'd broken into a Savannah pawnshop stealing cash and jewelry. "The evidence is clear," Bennett said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Lena Carter is a repeat offender, a danger to this community, someone who takes what isn't hers because she thinks she's entitled to it. Just another one of those people who can't follow the law." His words, laced with thinly veiled prejudice, struck Marcus like a blow, echoing the biases he'd fought his whole life, the kind that had once kept him and Lena apart, and now threatened to bury her under a system that rarely looked beyond the color of her skin. Marcus's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to Lena, who sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes fixed on the table as if bracing for a storm she couldn't escape, her silence a shield against the venom in Bennett's voice. Bennett called his first witness, the pawnshop owner, a jittery man named Henry Tate, whose testimony was damning. Tate described a woman in a dark coat breaking into his shop after hours, his voice trembling as he pointed to Lena, his words rushed and rehearsed. "It was her, I'm sure of it," he said, though his eyes darted away, avoiding Lena's gaze. Marcus's attention shifted to a new figure in the courtroom, a young woman in her 30s with curly hair and a notepad clutched in her hands, her name tag reading Nia Thompson, journalist. Her green eyes darted between Lena and Marcus with a quiet intensity, as if she sensed there was more to this case than met the eye. Nia had been covering Marcus's court for months, her articles often highlighting his commitment to fairness, but today, her presence felt like a spotlight Marcus couldn't escape. Lena's defense attorney, a determined black man named Jamal Harris, rose for cross-examination, his voice calm but piercing. "Mr. Tate, you said it was dark and your shop's lights were off, correct? Did you see the woman's face clearly?" Tate hesitated, his hands fidgeting, sweat beading on his forehead. Not entirely," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, a small admission that sent a ripple of doubt through the room, a faint glimmer of hope for Lena that Marcus clung to despite his role. During a brief recess, Nia approached Jamal in the hallway, her voice low but urgent as she glanced over her shoulder at the crowd of reporters. "There's something off about this case," she whispered, her fingers tightening around her notepad, her eyes clouded with a memory of her younger brother, wrongfully arrested years ago in a similar neighborhood. A trauma that had driven her to journalism to fight for the voiceless. "I grew up in a neighborhood like Lena's. I've seen how the system fails people like her, how it assumes guilt before innocence." Jamal nodded, his expression grim, his fingers gripping his briefcase as if it were a lifeline. "I know Lena from community outreach. She once spent her last dollar to buy a coat for a homeless man during a winter storm. But they've already made up their minds," he said, his words a quiet rebellion against the injustice unfolding inside. A rebellion that echoed Lena's own resilience, the kind she'd shown as a child when she'd shared her only pencil with Marcus, despite having so little herself. Marcus overheard their exchange from the hallway, his heart racing as he realized he wasn't the only one who saw the cracks in the case, a realization that both comforted and terrified him as he prepared to return to the bench, his duty as a judge now a battle against a past he couldn't ignore, and a guilt that gnawed at him for failing Lena all those years ago. The trial resumed with a grainy surveillance video, the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, projected onto a screen in the courtroom, the flickering image showing a figure in a dark coat breaking into the pawn shop before disappearing into the night. Charles Bennett's voice boomed as he pointed to Lena, his finger trembling with conviction. "This is your thief, ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his words a hammer striking the fragile hope Marcus had clung to after Tate's shaky testimony. Lena shifted in her seat, her chains clinking softly against the table, a sound that pierced Marcus's heart like a shard of glass, her face unreadable but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear he hadn't seen since they were children, hiding from his mother's wrath under the old oak tree, Lena whispering, "We'll always have each other," a promise Marcus had broken with his silence all those years ago. Jamal Harris rose to counter, his voice steady as he introduced a forensic analyst, a sharp woman in her 40s named Dr. Elena Ruiz, who'd reviewed the footage independently, her presence a quiet defiance against the prosecution's narrative. "The timestamp on this video has been altered," Dr. Ruiz said, her tone matter-of-fact, her glasses glinting under the courtroom lights as she adjusted them with a precise hand. "And the figure's height and build don't definitively match Ms. Carter." A murmur rippled through the jury, their faces a mix of doubt and curiosity, a shift Marcus felt in the air like a change in the wind, a fleeting chance for justice in a system so often stacked against people like Lena. Bennett scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer as he dismissed the testimony as speculation. But the seed of doubt had been planted, a crack in the prosecution's armor that gave Marcus a flicker of hope, though his role as a judge demanded he remain impartial, a demand that felt heavier with each passing moment. As the day drew to a close, Lena was given the chance to speak, a decision Jamal had warned against but one she insisted upon, her resolve a quiet echo of the girl Marcus once knew. the girl who'd once given her only scarf to a shivering classmate during a bitter Valdosta winter, her small hands trembling as she wrapped it around the child's neck, her kindness alight in a town that offered her so little warmth. Lena's voice trembled with raw emotion as she addressed the jury, her hands shaking slightly, the cuffs leaving faint red marks on her wrists. "I've struggled my whole life," she said, her words cutting through the stillness of the room. "But I didn't do this. I was walking home from my sister's house when they arrested me. They didn't ask, they just assumed." Her plea hung in the air, a desperate cry for understanding that struck Marcus like a tidal wave, his mind drifting to a memory of Lena sharing her only sandwich with him after a long day in the fields, her smile bright against the weight of a world that never made room for them. Nia Thompson, the journalist, watched from the back, her green eyes narrowing as she observed the jury's reactions, their softened expressions a sign that Lena's words had pierced through their preconceptions, a perspective that gave Nia hope for the first time since the trial began. Marcus's resolve hardened, his role as a judge now a platform to right a wrong, a decision forming in his heart that would soon challenge the very system he'd sworn to uphold, his guilt transforming into a fierce determination to see justice served. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial reached its final day, the faint creak of the wooden benches the only sound breaking the silence as the jury prepared to deliver their verdict, every eye trained on the foreman. Marcus sat at the bench, his hands folded tightly, his dark eyes fixed on Lena, who stood with her head bowed, her chains a stark reminder of the system's heavy hand, her thin frame trembling slightly under the weight of the moment. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with a steady voice, stood to read the verdict, her hands clutching the paper with a faint tremble. "In the case of the state of Georgia versus Lena Carter, we find the defendant—" The pause stretched on, unbearable, each second a lifetime, until she spoke again. "Not guilty." The room erupted in gasps, a few cheers breaking through the murmurs, and Marcus tapped his gavel, his voice steady as he restored order, though his heart raced with a joy he couldn't show, a relief so profound it felt like a weight lifting from his chest. Lena's shoulders sagged, a heavy burden slipping away as she looked up, her eyes meeting Marcus's for the first time since the trial began, a silent gratitude passing between them, a moment of connection that spoke of promises kept after decades apart. Her lips parted slightly, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face, a spark of pride flickering in her gaze as she stood a little taller, her resilience a quiet testament to the girl who'd never let the world break her spirit, a pride that Marcus mirrored in his own heart. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice firm, his gaze sweeping the room like a storm gathering strength. "This court has seen the evidence or lack thereof," he said, his tone carrying the authority of a man who'd fought for his place in this world, his words deliberate and sharp. "But I must address a deeper truth. I knew Ms. Carter as a child. We grew up together in a town that tried to tear us apart. A town where I failed her by staying silent when I saw her suffer." The courtroom fell silent, Nia's pen freezing mid-note, her breath catching as she realized the gravity of Marcus's admission, while Bennett's face paled, his confidence crumbling like dry sand. Marcus continued, his voice rising with a fire that had been smoldering for years. "I recused myself from swaying this verdict, but I will not recuse myself from the truth. This system failed her long before this trial, and I will not let it fail others like her." His words were a declaration, a shift in power that turned the courtroom into a stage for change. A change that would ripple far beyond these walls. A change that challenged the very foundations of justice as they knew it. Bennett stood, his voice trembling with indignation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he began, but Marcus cut him off, his eyes blazing with a fire that had been smoldering for decades, a fire fueled by every injustice he'd witnessed, every slight he'd endured. "What's irregular, Mr. Bennett, is a system that condemns a woman before she even steps into this room," he said, his words a rebuke that left Bennett speechless, the jury nodding in quiet agreement, their faces a mix of awe and understanding, their perspective shifted by Marcus's courage to speak a truth they'd long felt but never voiced. Marcus's revelation of their shared past, his admission of guilt, marked a turning point, a moment where justice became more than a verdict. It became a movement, one that Lena's quiet courage had sparked, and one that Marcus would now lead. A movement that would echo across the nation, his determination now a beacon for change, a testament to the power of standing up, even when the cost was high. As the courtroom emptied, Lena signed her release papers, her movements slow and deliberate, each stroke of the pen a quiet reclaiming of her freedom, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the paper against the desk, the weight of the chains replaced by a cautious hope that flickered in her eyes like a long-dormant flame. Marcus lingered at the bench, his robes feeling lighter than they ever had, as if the burden of decades had finally lifted, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd done. His words from the trial echoing in his heart like a vow he'd long forgotten to keep. Nia approached him, her notepad tucked under her arm, her green eyes bright with a mix of admiration and determination, her curly hair catching the dim light of the room. "Judge Wells, that was revolutionary," she said, her voice soft but firm, a quiet resolve in her tone that mirrored the fire Marcus had felt when he spoke out. "I'm writing a series on this. I want to expose the systemic failures you mentioned. Will you speak with me?" Marcus nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips, his heart swelling with a pride he hadn't felt in years, a pride that came from standing up for what was right, even when the cost was high. "Yes, Nia," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make sure this isn't the end of the story." His determination now a bridge to a future he could finally envision, one where justice wasn't just a dream. Lena turned to Marcus as the last of the clerks left the room, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty, her hands still trembling slightly as she approached the bench, her steps hesitant but her gaze steady, searching for the boy she'd once known beneath the judge's robes. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice low, a tremor of emotion threading through her words, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she looked at him. A woman who'd carried the weight of the world and now stood on the cusp of something new. Marcus stepped down, closing the distance between them, and reached out, pulling her into a gentle hug, his arm strong and steady, a gesture of solidarity that spoke of decades of unspoken apologies, his heart heavy with the guilt he'd carried, but now lighter with the hope of redemption. "I did, Lena," he whispered, his voice breaking, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I owed you that much. I owed us that much." Lena hugged him back, her breath hitching, her heart lighter than it had been in years. A moment of healing that bridged the gap between their past and present. A moment that spoke of forgiveness and hope. Her gratitude transforming into a quiet strength as she realized she was truly free. Not just from the charges, but from the shadows that had haunted her for so long. Outside the courthouse, Marcus and Lena stood together, watching as Nia spoke with Jamal, their voices a quiet hum of plans for change, a partnership born from the trial's revelations, their shared resolve, a testament to the power of collective action. Marcus had grown from a judge bound by the system to a man who'd used his position to challenge it, his resolve now a beacon for others, a testament to the power of standing up for what was right, even when the cost was high. Lena, too, had changed, her quiet resilience now a symbol of survival, her freedom a victory not just for her but for every soul the system had tried to break. A victory that taught Marcus the true meaning of justice. From Nia's perspective, the scene was a tableau of hope, a moment where the past and present converged to create a future she could believe in, her journalist instinct telling her that this story was only the beginning, a story that could inspire a nation to demand better, to do better. Years later, the effects of the trial rippled across the nation, the courthouse steps where Marcus and Lena had stood now a landmark for advocates of reform, their rallies bright with banners of justice and equality, their voices a chorus of hope that echoed from Savannah to Washington, D.C., a testament to the power of one verdict to change the course of history. Nia's series, published in a national outlet, had sparked a movement, her words painting Lena's story as a call to action, a story that led to the creation of the Southern Justice Initiative, a countrywide organization Marcus founded to provide legal aid, mental health support, and job training for those wrongfully accused, ensuring that no one would face the system alone, a legacy that honored the girl who'd taught him what courage looked like all those years ago, his pride in her resilience now a driving force for change. Lena, now free, found work as a counselor in the initiative, her gentle strength a guiding light for others, her laughter filling the Savannah office where she worked, a sound that Marcus cherished during his monthly visits, their friendship rekindled in the truest sense of the word, her hands steady as she handed a tissue to a client, a small act of kindness that echoed the generosity she'd shown as a child. Marcus's courtroom became a place of change, his rulings now a challenge to the biases that had once separated him from Lena, his voice a force for fairness that inspired other judges to follow suit, a movement that spread across the country, touching lives and changing systems, his legacy a testament to the power of standing up, even when the odds were stacked against you. At a national conference, Marcus stood beside Lena, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd, his dark eyes alight with purpose, a fire that had been kindled by Lena's courage and now burned brightly for all to see. "Justice isn't a verdict, it's a promise," he said, his words a vow, a reminder of the power of standing up, a power that had transformed a nation, a power that had transformed him, his pride in their shared journey now a beacon for others to follow. Lena smiled beside him, her heart full, a woman who'd sparked a revolution with her resilience, a revolution that would echo for generations, her quiet strength now a symbol of hope, a hope that had grown from the ashes of her struggles into a light that could guide others. From the perspective of the advocates who rallied on those courthouse steps, Marcus and Lena were more than individuals. They were symbols of what justice could be, a reminder that change was possible, even in a world that often resisted it. Their story, a rallying cry for those who believed in a better future. Dear viewer, Lena and Marcus's story shows us that justice can heal the deepest divides, that one act of courage can change the world if we're brave enough to act, a lesson that resonates with the power of kindness and the fight against systemic injustice. Have you ever stood up for what's right even when it was hard? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear your moments of bravery, your victories, just like Lena's. Stories that remind us of the strength we all hold within us. If this story touched you, like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more tales of justice and hope. Stories that inspire us to make a difference, to lift each other up. Let's build a world where fairness isn't a dream, where no one is judged by their past, because change starts with us, with you. With every heart we lift, a call to action that echoes the movement Marcus and Lena began, a movement that can grow with every voice that joins it.